So guys, this is Carmen Hunter, and Carmen reached out to me because you guys know this year I've been talking a lot about childhood trauma and some of the ramifications that that has had on me physically, emotionally, spiritually, all across the board. And she's like, Jimmy, I have a lot to say on this subject of trauma. Can I come on your podcast? And I usually, Carmen, I'm not real keen on like people cold reaching out to me, but I looked you up and I was like, all right, she's got some moxie in this area. Let's talk to her. So guys, welcome Carmen Hunter. She is carmenhunterhealth.com is her website. Go check her out. But welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. And, you know, I interviewed you years ago, and I told you this, I think, on message, that you are still one of my top 10 referrals: cholesterol clarity, keto clarity, all of the information, Live and Levita, low carb. Yes. Oh, that book, and it is so dog-eared in my, the clarity book has so many marks and tabs on it. When people ask to borrow it, I'm like, no, I just send them one, because I don't want them taking away all the notes that I've taken. So I just want to say out loud again, applauding you for that job well done on cholesterol. It opened my eyes. I ran out and got a CT scan on my heart within 2 weeks of reading that book.
Zero.
Yeah, zero. Been a game changer, an absolute game changer. So thank you for having me and to talk about this important topic. I feel very strongly about this topic of trauma, for sure.
Yeah. And it's a taboo topic. Like, I want to like start there. Why are people so reticent about talking about? I get it. It's pain. I get it. It's something that you try to forget. And when you have bad things in your life, I guess it's human nature to want to just shut that out and push it down deep inside. But that's the exact opposite of what people should be doing. Like, I really wish I did the work that I did the past year 25 years ago, because it would definitely saved me a lot of heartache and pain, and today still dealing with the physical ramifications of that trauma not being resolved.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's what I truly think and what I believe is going on, where people are trying to avoid the topic of trauma, agreeing with you that, yes, it's hard to face painful things, and it's sometimes easier if we just push it down, but also it's a place of comfort for us to avoid and ignore the topic. That's what we used to do as children when we were trying to survive. With. So it's a feeling of comfort that we're familiar with. But on the other side of the coin with this topic, I believe that there is such a stigma around being vulnerable and exposing the things about us that are less than perfect, so that we try to show up in the world as something other than we are, believing that if we present ourselves as perfect, no one will know about the things that are inside of us that are broken. And so vulnerability is a new topic for me too the last few years. I'm with you on this road. I wish I'd learned this 20 years ago, the mistakes that I would have avoided, right? But those are my initial thoughts about the question. But I think there's a couple of things we're dealing with here.
Well, and Brene Brown has definitely opened a lot of people's eyes to the whole vulnerability. And yes, go Brene. I love that woman to death. And if I could see her, I'd give her a hug and not let go, because she's just, and as a dude, it's very easy to say, well, it's not manly to be vulnerable, not manly to open yourself up. And I'm like, screw that. I want to be human more than man. And what you described, by the way, that whole wanting the perfection and hiding behind an image rather than what you are, you just described social media, by the way.
Yeah.
Because people, they put on this fake face, but then that becomes people's reality of, oh my gosh, look at all these people in my life, talking about on social media, that have got their lives put together and mine's falling apart. What's wrong with me?
Exactly. Yeah. And I got the chance to hug and meet Brene Brown. I got to see her live, and I love the story that she told. I'm glad that you brought this point up about men. I'm raising a 15-year-old son. I'm recently divorced and separated due to the product of infidelity and betrayal. A lot of vulnerability issues around that as well. So I believe, that it's very important we bring this to the public's, attention. That story she told about the man that walked up to her. Do you remember the story? He walked up to her and said, "Where's the information about men? Where's the information about men and vulnerability?" And she was like, basically at the moment she was in a learning process. She said, "Well, I don't talk to men." And he was like, "Well, that's a shame."
Should.
And she changed that and became more global and worldly with her approach to vulnerability, which is, a godsend for all men and women out there, especially in relationships, right? our men need to know that they can be vulnerable in front of us and that we still see them as strong and powerful in all ways. It's important.
And yet culturally, Carmen, that's still a stigma. Like, guys aren't supposed to cry. I cry all the time. I don't care anymore. I'm gonna be me, and if it means some guy thinks I'm a sissy, great, I'm a sissy. I don't care anymore, because I feel like we need to be giving permission for guys to be just as vulnerable as girls. I don't know where this whole notion that women are the only ones allowed to be emotional. I think guys having emotion, there's just something about the release of that. Just speaking personally, when I have a good cry, and I have had some really good cries the past year with various things in my life, with the childhood trauma and so other things, it's a release. And yet how many guys hold on to that? And then that, from my work, that has to manifest physically inside their body, pushes them over from a parasympathetic to a sympathetic state, increases inflammation, increases blood sugar and blood pressure and all the rest. That doesn't come without consequences.
100%. And not only that, but we have to remember that, most men, that are in relationship with women, when they're in relationship with women and we don't get to see that they have a softer side or a more vulnerable side, it's harder for us to feel open with our emotions as well, as we may be seen as less than perfect as the wife that can hold it all together. So it's damaging to both parties when men are not able to show their vulnerability. And, again, returning to my own personal experience, the failures of relationships and marriage they fall on both parties, right? It's never just the man's fault, even if he's the one who betrayed, right? It's never just the woman's fault, even if she's the one that shopped them into financial dismay or whatever. It's both parties' responsibility to have open doors of communication. And that means exposing vulnerabilities that can make communication better, easier, more accepting of each other. I believe it's one of the demises of relationships and marriage across the board when men feel like they have to uphold some form of strength and not show us where their pain is. Because nobody gets out of childhood alive, right? We all have been raised in a situation where there's probably been some dysfunction, some trauma, some experience that we have tucked away, repressed, and suppressed that will always show up. It will come. I don't care if it's your teenage years or your adult years, it's going to show up.
And I think sometimes people hear that phrase childhood trauma and they don't think about even adverse childhood events. Your parents going through a divorce, that's an adverse childhood event.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't directly involve you, but it did indirectly. And so it has effect. The loss of someone very close to you that died suddenly. And I know some of the people I've talked to with childhood trauma, it wasn't that they were abused physically, emotionally, or sexually. They saw their parents or some close family member get shot and murdered right in front of them. That's an adverse childhood event.
Yeah. Yes.
And all of these things can send people into a tailspin. And I think there has to be some system set up that helps those people, once they become adults, kind of get the help they need. Like, I think about my own journey with my dad being physically and emotionally abusive. At 17 and a half, I got out of that situation. Thankfully, I was still smart and was able to go to college at UT Martin, just over the road from you. And I was able to get a degree and go on. But I still dealt with all that stuff 15 years later, and even then it was just getting to the point of, I'm not fearful of looking over my shoulder and thinking my dad's going to kill me anymore. At that point it was like, okay, now my health and my weight is messed up. Now I've got to pick up the pieces from that, which were the ramifications of the trauma. So it's like, we got to figure out a way to get to people sooner to help them heal.
Yeah, and certainly what's happening today isn't helping anything about what's happening to our children when it comes to trauma. I mean, I've faced a lot of pushback about saying that, some of the things that are going on today are abusive to children. And, from a psychological standpoint, we have yet to know what's even going to happen to those kids. We forget that their amygdala gets all lit up when they are faced with stressful or fearful experiences. For some people, just being in their home this whole time has been traumatizing. But I think we need to also remember that, when people think as adults, they might say, well, my childhood was great. Nothing happened to me like what you just said. I wasn't physically abused, but they don't realize that neglect or emotional ignoring them emotionally, or not being able to get the attention of a parent during a time when they need them, is just as traumatizing to them, if not more sometimes, than a physical abuser. So I think to define trauma is very difficult for some people, because there's many different types of trauma. Even touching a stove and burning your hand as a child can make you afraid of lighting a candle when you're older. We have to remember, it's not just the big things, it's the small things too.
When I was 10, I got bit in the face by a Doberman Pinscher that attacked me. To this day, I'm still terrified of dogs.
Right.
And my dad threw a rubber snake at me at the end of a fishing trip. He was putting away the poles and everything, and he reached in the tackle box. He said, "Here, Jimmy, hold on to this." And he threw this thing in the air, and it's flailing through the air. It looked very real, landed right on my face.
Oh my gosh.
I am terrified of dogs and snakes to this day because of those incidences. And I never thought about it until you just said that now,
Yeah.
that was a form of trauma. It's still traumatizing me to this day.
Well, you're talking to the woman who walked into a nest of ticks, a nest of millions of ticks when I was 6, and all the women at the farmer's market, when I started screaming, came out and were hitting me with their bags to get them off. They were crawling in my eyes. To this day, I'm better about it. But if I see a tick, I get a visceral response in my body. And even a bug in general, I don't like to kill anything. I'm super soft-hearted. So I'll put a glass over it, scoot it on a piece of paper. But the entire time, my heart is palpitating, my body's responding. And I realize that I'm a grown adult. I am no longer that child. So that's a message and a story I tell myself quite a bit. When I am in a triggered, and that's the word, right? We get triggered. Our body will get triggered in some situations. And sometimes we can't put our finger on it. Like, why is this happening? I always try to remember, okay, well, that might be coming from a childhood experience that is no longer real. So we have to tell our body a different story. You are no longer walking into a nest of ticks. Your dad is no longer throwing a snake at your face. You have these feelings, but how do we change the narrative and the dialogue that's going on in our mind that's keeping us reacting this way?
Yeah, the cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. I've been talking to a life coach like yourself. You're one of those life health coaches out there, and she's also a licensed therapist. So she's very familiar with like a lot of the common things that are used out there in her industry. And so when she introduced that to me, where you take an incident and you reframe it. It was so powerful. Now, I know that doesn't work for everybody. And sometimes when I bring up CBT, they're like, that doesn't work. I understand it doesn't work for everybody, but it is powerful. And it shows you the power of resiliency of the mind that I don't
Yes.
think enough people tap into, Carmen, where they think they are like me, fearful of dogs and fearful of snakes. And in your case, fearful of ticks and any bug. Do roly-polies freak you out too?
Oh, please don't even. I think I got to chill my back on that too. No.
Kind of like a tick. It's very similar in look to a tick. So I just
Yep.
so I mean, we have these things, and so it doesn't like eradicate all of those things, but it's powerful, and I don't think we give our minds enough credit for being able to self-heal some of that doubt that we put in there.
Right. And I think that's also one of those things that we have a tendency to do, is we look outside of ourselves for the answers. Right. So that's the same thing as we were talking about earlier, perfectionism and showing up a certain way. When we look outside of ourselves for validation, to the world around us, to our friends, to the people on social media, to our spouses, to anybody besides looking within ourselves for validation, we're setting ourselves up for just continuing this ongoing dialogue, because the answer is within all of us. It's within each of us. We just have to find the right modality to be able to go after that trauma, to hopefully fix it, eradicate it, or deal with it in a way that's healthier than we are.
Well, and the ironic thing is people don't want to be in pain. And so our innate desire and I guess reflex is to avoid pain. But see, sometimes you get a little bit of pain to get rid of the pain. But people don't look at it that way. I don't want any pain at all. And thus, by avoiding the pain, you're causing more pain. Whereas if you allowed a little bit of pain of kind of thinking about the memory, then reassociating it with a positive memory, you're actually eradicating that pain altogether.
Yes, correct. And also, remembering that when we're experiencing discomfort or uncomfortable things, we also, again, always looking outside of what's going on, we're thinking, this isn't okay, I shouldn't feel this way, because we've been told by mass media, mainstream media, marketing, that you should be happy all the time. Here's a drug, here's a this or a that. You shouldn't feel despair and sadness. You shouldn't feel anything that's not perfectly happy. When in reality, that's human. That's being human. We are supposed to feel everything we feel. So to invalidate a feeling by saying, you shouldn't feel that way, or here, let's fix that, makes us feel shamed. Another childhood trigger, right? Shame. That we even feel less than happy. So we've got that stigma on us as well. We human beings are being put under so much pressure to be perfectly happy all the time and never have a problem. I'm not shocked that we have so much dysfunction and addiction going on in our world today.
Well, and see, here's the thing. If you never experience the downest of downs, how do you know that the uppest of ups is a good thing? Because
100%.
it's the same way it is all the time. If you're all the time, how do you know that that's a good thing? Like, you need that, I guess, contrast to be able to feel the difference. Now, I'm not saying that you should stay in the lowest of low. We all know those people on Facebook that they share their whole life story, and it's always blah, blah, gloom, gloom, woe is me. And I'm just like, okay, you need a happy pill. So,
Yeah.
but then you got the same people that, other people that say, oh, happy, 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 joy, 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 joy. I'm like, no, 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 no. You can't possibly be that way all the time. I want to see somebody who is true to themselves that says, you know what, today's not such a good day, and here's why. Da 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 da. People relate to that. Like, people often tell me they love following my work because they love a real person, because
I
it's
get that too.
fake out there with some other people. And I'm not calling out names, but you know who you are. You're putting forth this image that is not helping anybody, even though it's like, oh, wow, look what you could be. It's kind of this look of perfection. It's not realistic. I think people are looking for somebody, okay, I have weight on the body still. I look like you. You want to relate to me. You want to hear what I'm doing to try to deal with that.
Yeah.
So it's amazing to me that we like this whitewashedness, but it's the exact wrong thing that people are actually looking for.
100% that too. And you know what's funny is it's been over almost 11 years since I got into health and wellness space. Started out as a personal trainer, and it morphed very quickly into being a health coach, because I quickly realized when people were asking, well, I'm working out 7 days a week with you, but I'm still not losing weight. And I'm like, okay, what's going on with your endocrine system and all of these other things, right? I felt the same pressure. My ego grabbed me quickly and ran off with me. All right, make sure you stay looking this way. Make sure that you have the Lululemon clothes. Make sure that people don't see you as having any marriage problems. Make sure that everything looks perfect and your kid's got a green smoothie in his hand. And that was exhausting. And guess what it led to for me? Major digestive distress, major stress on my immune system, unhealthy, habits. And I quickly realized that you can try to attract an audience of people like you and I in this space of trying to build businesses and whatnot, with all of these fronts and these fake things like beautiful photo shoots and clothes and all of that, right? But in reality, you're going to exhaust yourself by being someone other than you are. So authenticity is what I teach everybody that I work with. Got to
It's
be who you are.
you absolutely have to be who you are. It's the reason why most people fizzle out after a few years. Like,
Uh-huh.
I've been 15 plus years, you've been around 11 years. You've seen people come and go,
Yes.
might come in white hot. Oh my gosh, they're the best new thing. Oh wow, look at them. They're doing this, they're doing that. And then suddenly fall off the face of the planet and you never hear from them again. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because
You
they
can't hold it up. You can't keep it up.
image to keep up. My image is what you see is what you get. And if you don't like it, move on to someone else that's fake. But I'm going to be real with you. And I think the reason why people stick around to people like you and me is they're attracted to that realness.
Yeah. Yeah. And because we, like you said earlier, they resonate with us. They see that we have been through an experience. And I will say, whatever that may be, when we can come forward and say, yes, I had childhood dysfunction and trauma. Yes, I have a great relationship with my parents, right? I do. I'm very fortunate that I can sit down and have these conversations with my parents. Do you remember this? And this is what this felt like, right? But not everybody has that. But it is always going to be ultimately our own responsibility to want to heal and repair the things in our lives that we feel are holding us back from being our best selves. It's when we deny that we are responsible and accountable to ourselves for our own lives is when we get into trouble. That's when we start looking elsewhere to make ourselves feel better.
Oh, and speaking of external things, looking externally, trying to fix you, that's when the internal work comes in handy. Like, I had to come to terms with, what am I going to do with my relationship with my abuser?
Yeah.
And I had to make the decision, Carmen. I didn't want to do it, but in the end, I'm like, I have to do it. I cut off ties with him
Mm-hmm.
because I felt that it was more detrimental to stay in a relationship with someone with so many memories, and he shows no contrition. He actually called my mom when I started talking about this very publicly. When I came back from sabbatical in March, I started talking about the trauma, and word got back to him through some friends and family. And, oh, Jimmy's talking about, you abused him. And so he calls my mom. He had not called my mom, who they've been divorced many years, in 12 years since my brother died. And that was the last time they talked. And he's like, I think we need to talk about our son, and he's gone off the deep end. I didn't do any of that. And I'd already talked to my mom. I said, Mom, Dad's going to probably call you. And she's like, no, you beat him. You need to deal with this yourself. And
Yeah.
I'm supporting my son. You do what you have to do. He has yet to call. He's yet to do anything, yet to apologize, nothing. Like, literally all he would have to do, and I know it's putting my expectation on him, but all he would have to do that I would be back in his life is, look, I messed up. My dad beat the crap out of me every single day. And I learned that's how you parent. And so when I became a parent at a very early age, he had me at 21, my brother Kevin at 17. I didn't know what to do. So I just defaulted to what I knew to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I hit you kids. My
Yeah.
mom told me that at 3 weeks old, my brother Kevin got shook and hit in the back of the head by my dad, and that he ended up not being very intelligent. And my mom always wondered, did that jar something in his brain,
Mm.
cause that? Because I was pretty smart, and my sister Beverly's pretty smart. So it seemed weird that genetically he should have been more intelligent than he was. And so I had to make that decision. Do I keep him in my life and try to pretend like what happened didn't happen?
Mm-hmm.
Or do I say, you know what? Enough is enough. He's tormented me enough in my life. I'm going to cut off that relationship. And I decided to do that. And my mom
Yeah.
asked me, like, are you going to be okay? Because he's going to die someday. And I was like, yeah, he's been dead to me for years.
Yeah.
But why must I have him physically in my life just because he's still here? Now, the flip side of that, Carmen, my relationship with my mom has never been better. I talk to her about every 2 to 3 days,
Mm-hmm.
and we go deep in the conversation. Like, she's finally the mom I always wish I could have. Like, I always wanted to have someone I could just share and not be worried about offending, and not be worried about having to say things in a certain way and dancing on eggshells. That is exhausting. I'm
Yeah.
just with my mom, and my mom's like, wow, I see a side of my son I'd never seen before. And then, like, she's blunt back to me, and I'm like, whoa, like, where's that been? Like, it just took until she was past 70 years old before that happened, but better late than never.
Absolutely. And let's not forget about the fact that when people make these decisions, like whenever I talk about trauma, I like to be able to, relate to everyone. Not everyone can just cut people out, right? But not everyone can afford therapy. Not everyone has the ability to go this alone. Everyone is in a different space when they deal with this. But one thing I want to say is in honoring that you left a situation that you knew your body has known all of these years has been harmful for you, right? And interestingly enough, for many of the years, towards the end of my marriage, my body ached and hurt all the time. Everything, I just was not my healthiest things. I was like, what is going on? I'm doing all of these things, right? And what my body was trying to tell me was like, this is not a safe place for you. We are reminding you of an old triggered experience. This person is bringing that experience into your reality. And so same as you, I can't completely cut this person out of my life because I have a child that's a minor. However, I still struggle with seeing specific, like his name comes on my email, my heart starts to pound. And I brought this up to my therapist. I'm a big believer in therapy. And she said, it can take absolutely years and years and years, even though you're in your mind, you've moved on and life is good and different and you're happier than you've ever been, your body is very deeply in your cells when you experience such traumatic experiences that have triggered those old childhood wounds. So for me, and let's just backtrack real quick, being, cheated on, I hate that word because it sounds so stupid, but being betrayed, multiple times.
Hey,
Yeah.
that is what happened. So
It is what happens, but it triggered an experience of abandonment from when I was born because my mom almost died having me. So they took me out of the delivery room and I didn't see her for 5 weeks. So I felt very, abandoned. My body was physiologically crying out for my parent, but I felt abandoned. And that was triggered in me 46 years later. 46 years later. So we have to remember that even if life has been flowing around, everything's great, we're married to a wonderful person, we have great kids, and our home is beautiful. When we have things that happen to us and we become addicted to things or we become angry or triggered, it's from something a long time ago that deserves your attention.
oh, you are preaching so good today.
Yeah, right?
It's like people, they think of the instances that happen like in their adult life as those instances, but it's almost always an accumulation of the other traumatic instances. When we talk about childhood trauma, people think it's just that instance, the
Yeah.
sexual abuse, the physical abuse. Like I still see to this day my head going into a wall. And not that I get a visceral reaction from that anymore, but I can see it in my mind's eye. That's just how my brain works. Or the words that were spoken, and the words, like as much as you want to say sex abuse and physical abuse are bad, and they are,
Mm.
the words are the things that just keep reverberating over and over and over again in your mind. That was the hardest thing for me, Carmen, was getting past the words. So anyway, back to what I was saying, that people think it's the actual in the moment, the trauma is what happened in the moment. It's what's happened in the years after. And that
Yeah.
trauma continues, so that when this next event comes up, a husband leaves you or cheats on you or whatever, it's just exacerbating the trauma that was already there, and it's now manifested and piled on more. So now that all becomes your little yarn ball that just keeps getting bigger and bigger to the next thing. And then of course people are like, okay, where does it end? Where does it stop? And that's where people like yourself are trying to help people work through that, getting the necessary help you need from like a therapist. It's so multi-layered, which kind of makes the silliness of mocking people because they can't lose weight or they have some health issue going on, even though they eat real food. It's silly when you take away this part of the equation.
I agree so much. And and like you said about that ball of yarn, how I unravel the ball of yarn is whenever I feel a trigger or an emotion that I can't put my finger on from being current, I look at it and I think, is this something that's coming from an earlier time in my life? And I do a lot of evaluating and asking of myself, where is this coming from? Is this true for you today? So I'll give you my school bus analogy. This is the one that I give to people when I try to help them to understand what's theirs today and what's not to deal with, right? So I always say, think about a bus full of children. Every one of those children is an adult problem. Okay, like finances or spouse marriage problems or weight problems or whatever. Every child is an actual adult problem. And then you open up that door, and in that bus driver's seat is the child that you were the little kid, however you show up. So for me, when I open the bus door, it's a 6-year-old sitting in the driver's seat, and all the problems behind me are being a single mom, starting over, entrepreneurship, a new relationship, all of those things. So whenever I feel triggered by one of those adult problems that's riding around in my bus, I will open that door in my mind as grown-up me and say, you can step out of the driver's seat for those problems. Let me go ahead and climb in. I'm going to take care of that. You go do something fun for yourself, right? So it's a constant reminder, and it's just a little tool that I use to remind myself, you are no longer the child that feels like you have to take care of adult problems, because I'm an adult. And I've raised a child and I've run a household and I make money and I make decisions. Children don't have sex. They don't have children. They don't do adult things, right? So we need to remind the child, you're not supposed to be doing those things. Let me take care of it for you. And that will almost always take me and shift me into a calmer way of thinking, to remind myself, oh, that's right, I'm an adult. Oh, I handle these problems, not her, right? So it's always been helpful for me to remind little me that big me is here and can handle everything that's being thrown her way.
You know what the biggest mistake is in this realm? And I love that analogy with the school bus, by the way. So thank you for that. The biggest problem is people think you should just get over what's happened to you in your past as if it didn't happen. That's what my dad did. He's
Mm-hmm.
like revisionist history. What happened didn't happen. And I think when you do that, it invalidates what actually happened. And so
Yes.
if you're invalidated in an experience that you have vivid memories about, like, the brain can't handle that. The brain knows. The brain doesn't forget. You can conscientiously say, "Oh yes, I was. It was a long time ago. I'm letting it go." No, the trauma's still there, like a
Mm-hmm.
ugly little monster just hanging over your head. Unless you punch that mf'er in the face, you're not going to get rid of him.
Right.
But people, they do. They're like, well, we'll just pretend like it didn't happen. And I've heard many a story since I started talking about trauma. Oh my gosh, the people came out the woodwork, and I had all kinds of people writing to me. Oh yeah, I was sexually abused when I was a kid, and I was told not to talk about it, and so I never did. Here I am, 33 now, and my life's a wreck. I've lost my husband. I've got and all this stuff, and you're just going, wow, this is more profound. And yet it's never, ever talked about in the realm of health, in the realm of society, in the realm of I guess psychology. They do talk about it, but it's not in the public eye enough.
Yeah, it needs to become more and more mainstream. I actually do interviews with my personal therapist about boundaries, attachment, trauma. We're doing an interview this month on boundaries. But there's books out there like The Body Speaks the Mind, right? We're talking about books like that. And then you've got books about children raised by narcissists, right? The narcissist next door. If people understand that what happened to them isn't their fault,
Right.
that can lift a weight off of them. Period. Stop being so hard on yourself. You didn't choose this as a child. You didn't choose these things to happen to you. It makes it no less painful as an adult at all. You need to just know that you're in charge of how you move forward with it from here.
Oh man, if I hear one more parent blame all of their woes on their kids, like that just irks me to no end because it triggers me in my childhood trauma. All the bad things that happened in my dad's life is all my fault, as if I had that kind of power in his life as an adult. Like you said, adults do adult things, children do children things. There's
Yes.
no way that could have impacted him the way that he described it. And yeah, I still hear those kinds of stories today where you have a narcissist parent and the poor kid is just desperately hanging on for survival. How do I get out of here? I can't wait till I turn 18, ABC ya.
Mhm.
And it's unfortunate that it's gotten to that point. But then those kids grow up to be narcissists and grow up to have kids that then they blame all their woes on. You never break the cycle.
That's right. Somebody has to stop it. And that's one of the reasons why, I say all the time that I am so, so glad and so grateful, as hard as it's been to start over. At the time I was 47, I'm 49 now. To start over, I am so grateful that I am no longer in that triangle of dysfunction, right? Where I was dragging my son into it with me. And I own my part of the dysfunction, especially to my son, and have told him, whatever you feel that I put on you as your responsibility in regards to this family relationship, I want you to know that I am sorry for that. And I no longer, I mean, like, I would never, ever, ever do that to you if I were in a healthy mindset. So I think part of it is having open communication, first of all, with ourselves, but then with the little ones that we're raising. If we take an honest look at what we're doing and how we're raising our kids, we can honestly all say, okay, I can do better here. But I think that every parent would do better to look inward and say, what am I doing in my parenting that's projecting my problems onto my child and creating dysfunction and addiction for his future? Because you can run away from the memories all you want, but they will show up in your behavior and they'll show up in your physical body, like you were saying.
Oh my gosh. This year has exposed so much of what you just said, so much. When I read the statistic, Carmen, that 1 in 4 teenagers, which is what your kid is, wanted to commit suicide and some of them were successful.
Yes.
That
Yes.
broke my heart. It was such Like, we want to talk about a pandemic, and I'm not minimizing COVID-19 by any means. People don't misinterpret what I'm saying here. But the real pandemic is domestic abuse and violence, and
Hmm.
kids not being mentally stable because of that. Like,
Yes.
if we don't get a handle on that, we gotta, I mean, we're already teetering on the edge now, even with the adults out there acting fools, going into stores and yelling at each other about masks of all things. It's like we have a major pandemic, and it's not COVID-19.
Mm-mm. Not in any capacity. And, my son and I went on the news this summer about going back to school normally. And, I said, my son, I don't want him going to school wearing a mask. It is psychologically, physically, emotionally, and mentally damaging and traumatizing to our children to expose them to a less than normal, not normal at all, social environment when they're supposed to be being raised by their peers as a second parent. And they cannot do that if they cannot pick up on social cues. They cannot hear each other. One girl's son was beat up on the first day of school because he misinterpreted what someone said and wasn't able to get an eye on what was being communicated to him. And that's not okay. So, I made a post last night, and it said, masks are child abuse. Yes or no? Comment below. It's a question. I don't believe parents are abusing their children. So let me be clear on that. I believe that our government and what's happening today is abusive to children by forcing them to wear these masks in situations where, well, at all, first of all, without a physical biomedical doctor to know if they're healthy mentally, emotionally, and physically enough to wear one. But what's happening is they're missing all of those developmental cues. And their frontal lobe's not even developed until they're 25 years old. So spontaneity there's no control over that. There is no control. And they're running around with their amygdalas all on fire. So I'm very fearful. And my son is here. He's homeschooling. He's probably listening upstairs and going, "Oh, mom, it's damaging for him to be home alone in front of a computer all the time too." But as a parent, we have a responsibility to make the best of whatever situation we can. And that's creating social environments for our kids, making sure they're going out and seeing their friends, having their friends over here, and keeping things as normal as possible while the world around us spins out of control. So we thought parenting was hard before. This
Yeah.
is like triple whammy. The trauma, we're not going to see this for 10 years of what's happened to our kids.
Oh my gosh. And sociologists and psychologists are going to look at like a retrospect study of what happened in the years following 2020. And
Oh,
yeah, they're going to see so much data. And you were mentioning about, needing that socialness. I'm 48 years old, and I'm by myself. I really haven't gone and seen people. Normally by this time in the year, Carmen, I've gone to like 7 keto conferences. I've hugged thousands of people's necks, and I've had that interaction with people. I've had a whole lot of nothing this year.
yeah.
I mean, if it's hit an adult person who's relatively stable, and able to understand things and know what's going on, that yet still is struggling, I can't imagine a 15-year-old like your son who would be separated from their friends, and touch and interaction and just that development of relationships. It's going to stunt the growth of so much of what we take for granted for humanity. 2020 has just kind of said, "Oh, no, we're going to stop all that real fast, and it won't come without consequences."
You're absolutely right. And we're the neural pathways that they are laying down in their brains right now are either going to be healthy or unhealthy, right? They're laying down these pathways for their memories, for their future, how they relate, how do they connect with others, how do they show up socially in the world, how do they communicate, all of those things. So those deep grooves in their brains, when they finally get older and realize this is adulthood, how am I going to function in relationships, in my career, in my life? They're going to have to create new neural pathways, and that is going to have to be with the help of therapy, the help of with modalities like EMDR and brain spotting and neurofeedback. And I said, I guess it's been a couple months now, start saving money for therapy right now for those children that are adults of your children that are adults that are going to have to try to navigate through why they have anxiety and panic and addiction and can't stay in a relationship and don't have any boundaries. Let's not even go there. Boundaries are lost across the board, but now we're being forced into boundaries that are keeping us from connecting with people. It's the most backwards thing I've ever experienced.
And that's assuming that the parents give a damn. Like,
Exactly.
if you've got the parents that don't give a damn and are causing more trauma on top of that trauma, those are the ones I'm really, really worried about. Those are the ones that you've got the narcissist parent or both parents, and it's just oozing all over the kids, even without COVID-19 and all the other things, the ramifications of that. Just that alone was going to be difficult. Well, now you're adding the social isolation and being at home a lot more with your abuser. I'm just so sick to my stomach at all of what was considered good intentions to help. I guess, what was it? Flatten the curve was the original intention of staying home and da da da. What's happened? Like, we're well beyond that, and yet we're the curve's flat. Dead
Yeah. Yeah.
flat. Like, what else are we having to do here? Well, we don't want the second wave. Well, how do we know that's going to happen? Like, it just, there's so many angles, and the word manipulation. I've had a lot of people on my shows lately kind of talking about kind of the word usage, what socially distance rather than physically distant. It's like, it's all by design to, I guess, trains people's brains into thinking there's some kind of a quote new normal. Screw that. I want normal. I don't want the new normal.
Right. And well, we'll never be back to that again. At some point, we would hope we would return. We're not going to return to that. But, for me, this is all turned political. I'm that person that says, we haven't even isolated this yet. COVID-19 has never been isolated or proven with Koch's postulates, right? The proving through that. So how do we know? I know that coronaviruses exist. We know this. Everyone's got it, right? It's like Epstein-Barr and all of that. But we haven't isolated this COVID-19 thing yet. So yeah, I know, right? And I have people all the time say to me, what do you mean we haven't isolated it? My great grandmother or my grandmother died from it. And I'm like, well, no, because testing's, is imperfect as well. There's no test for something you can't isolate.
Well, and even the test amplifies it. I did a Jimmy Rants recently where they like amplify it 30 to 40 times what the actual is. So it may show a very minuscule as something bigger than it is. And then, of course, the ICD code of calling something death by COVID when they're really not dying of COVID-19. They're dying from the ramifications of comorbidities, upwards of 3 on average. Yeah, I mean, there's just so many things, and this again is not going to come without consequences mentally. All of this anguish and stress, and we're not even talking about the race relations things. We're not even talking about the presidential election. And oh yeah, by the way, people going through stuff in their own personal lives. It's overwhelming.
Yeah, it is. And I think that, if we look at the big picture, the goal is to divide us, to keep us separated from each other, to to not allow us to again come together and share ideas. I think that one of the things that could be really helpful for people who are dealing with these unsettled feelings or they can't put their finger on, is this trauma, is this unsolved problems from when I was younger or whatever, is to find community, to find people that they can connect with, because we heal through relationship with others. Right? We heal through relationships. So, after an almost 2-decade marriage, I thought, well, forget this. I'm done with all this. I made how am I going to make a good decision in my future when, I had to look at where I had loose boundaries. I call them leaky boundaries. Where were my boundaries leaky, where I was allowing someone else to tell me my value, right? Where did I not stand up for what I knew to be true? So fixing ourselves in this situation that we're living in right now and looking internally to see how can we become more balanced and solid within ourselves is the first step to healing the world or healing America or whatever is going on around us. You have to start with yourself. So people can get mad at Trump and they can blame it on, BLM, and they can blame everything on everyone else. But guess what? It is the people's responsibility to stand against what's real and right and true and ethical. And right now, there's not enough people standing up and saying, this is not okay. What is happening to the American people, too, people in general around the world, it's not okay. What are we going to do about it? You need to go inside, find the answers inside, then do the work to bring as many people with you as you can and show that community connection is the answer to all of our problems.
Well, and we are seeing uprisings in Germany and Australia and New Zealand and pockets of places here in America where people are just like, enough is enough. It's like, we can't have more death and calamity from the ramifications of the procedures put into place to protect us from COVID-19 than COVID-19 itself. And yet that's exactly what has happened.
Absolutely, it has, and you know, the deaths by despair are rising. I mean, suicide, it's terrible. And I remember this summer, I think it was probably in June, and I started to just try to like almost pound my fist, like, do you not understand that there are people, and this is the part that's really hard for me. I think about the people out there who have no one. They have no one. They're alone, especially the elderly. So I'm an animals, children, and elderly advocate. Okay, us able-bodied people in the middle. All right, we can, you know, we can do our thing, right? But I think about the elderly, just like when it's hot. Think about it like this: in New York City, when it's hot and someone doesn't have an air conditioner and they die from heat stroke, right? That happens, or wherever around the world. What about those people who have no one checking on them? Not one person in their life. They are alone. They're scared. They're isolated. When will they be found? When will they be found? They've not left their apartments. It's all over. We know this is happening all over the world, that there are people who have died and we don't even know it yet.
Yeah.
So let's think about what's coming from that. I mean, it's a snowball effect, the ramifications and the disease and all of those things, and the trauma of finding someone like that. Like, those are the things I think so deeply about. It's not just this moment in this day, it's deeper than that. So you know, when I thought about that, that's one thing that kept me up at night was, what about those people who are just completely isolated and alone and they have no one?
Well, and then the total, thank you for bringing that out, by the way. I had not really thought about that. So thank you for putting it on my radar screen. But even like the totality of the population being in both a state of fear, which
Mhm.
again, by design, and uncertainty. It's like, okay, we have no end date when this is all going to be, quote, over, whatever
Right.
that means. And so it's like people's brains don't wrap around that. And again, what we've been talking about in today's show is triggering trauma. Fear, uncertainty is a surefire way of bringing back all those feelings all over again.
Yes, I agree with that. And that was my point when I was saying earlier about the masks, you know, on kids. Is that's my point, is fear. There, you know, I passed someone in the grocery store yesterday. I'm always the only one without a mask unless I have my child or my boyfriend with me, because they don't wear one either. But and I heard a little girl say to her mom, you know, I watched out of my corner of my eyes. I passed him, and she said, "Mommy, she's not wearing a mask." And then she was straining to like watch me walk by. A little girl, I think she was probably maybe 4 or 5. And I didn't hear what her mom said. Her mom was totally fine. She just kept moving, not like some people who have turned around and felt like it was their duty to tell me which way the arrows go on the floor, right? But you know, that is becoming abnormal for small children to see people's faces in a public setting. If that's not some form of abuse, I don't know what is.
It's so sad too when you're walking through a store and you're smiling at people and all you see is sadness.
Yeah, or they just pull back. I had someone walk by me like pressed up against the wall. So
Well, I'm careful not to get real close because I'm trying to be considerate to their
me
concern.
too. Mm-hmm.
I try to not just 6 feet, but like 12 feet. I don't get anywhere close to anybody. And I keep my mouth shut. Like if the girl talking to me at the checkout, thanks for coming in, I'll just wave. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm just like, man, mouth shut the whole time. So there's no aerosol particles getting out in the air from me. And I don't feel bad about not wearing one. I need to breathe. I literally have almost passed out wearing a mask. But I think there's enough people now that they're just like, okay, if I get it, say la vie,
Well,
whatever happens.
99.9% recovery rate from a
Well,
non-existent, non-isolated virus. So there's that.
there's that too. And plus our age group, we're kind of in that not quite inevitable, but even in the inevitable group, it's still 95 point something. It's still
Yeah.
pretty. So with no comorbidities. So yeah, I'm taking my chances. I'm not worried about it. There's too many things that I have overcome in my life, and maybe this is a little bit of the mentality too of people like you and me. We've been through some stuff, and so
Yeah.
when you've been through stuff and you've overcome that stuff, a virus with a 99.8% survival rate is a piece of cake.
That's absolutely right. And I want to just make a point to let people know, you know, when we are faced with our stuff, when it becomes apparent that it is a traumatic experience that we have had, and we feel this overwhelming fear of, oh my gosh, what do I do about it right now? How do I handle this? How do I manage it? All you have to do is go out and to the adverse, like you said, adverse childhood experiences study, take a look at the ACE study and see, give yourself a little quiz on that. See if you fall anywhere in there. And there are resources everywhere to help people deal with that, what's been imprinted into your body. It is not your fault. It is not your fault that you feel this way. And in fact, there's a book I'm reading right now, and I wish I could find the guy's name, but it's called Letting Go. It's David Hawkins, I think is his name, and Power versus Force. But Letting Go talks about you can do every modality known to man. You can try everything, Reiki, chanting, tapping, red light therapy, whatever is going on with you physically, mentally, emotionally, right? But if we don't learn to let go of the emotion that we've attached to the thoughts that we have, we're not telling our body that everything is okay. So, we have to let go. We have to let go of the attachment we have to the dysfunction in our lives, right? And one of the things I wanted to share also is that, and a lot of people don't know about it, but a lot of people are starting to realize there's a therapy called brain spotting. Have you heard of brain spotting?
I've heard the term, but to talk about it.
Okay, so brain spotting, I had, and just so you know, I went through the ringer with therapy when it came to infidelity and all of that, because it's one of the most, the top traumatic experiences that anyone can go through. And it is deeply hard to move past if the person that did that, the so-called perpetrator, whatever, doesn't own what they did. Just like you talked about with your dad earlier. It gets imprinted in our bodies in ways that we can't even begin to understand as we unravel this mystery, right? So brain spotting is a modality that David Grand created. His name is David Grand. He's amazing. And my therapist was actually trained by him directly, and he's a friend of hers. So when I found her, this is what I told her. I said, I'm going to be a tough cookie. I've been to a lot of therapists, and I'm stubborn about hanging on to my pain. So good luck if you're going to be able to get through to me, right? I'm straight up front, like I want help, but I'm telling you I'm stubborn. And so she said, okay, well, let's just get started. And immediately, so what happens with brain spotting, and the belief is, and this is, just a real quick shorty of it, is that a memory lives in your brain. From all your memories live up here somewhere. So when you have a traumatic experience, and for me, it was, we thought the betrayal, right? But where we found the biggest pain for me was abandonment, like I told you earlier, when I was born. So what they do is they hold a pointer. You can use a finger, or they can use a teacher pointer, the tip of a pen, and the eyes follow the client or patient's eyes follow that process until it triggers a memory. And it triggers a memory when it lands on a specific place. So the eye, and I can't explain it exactly, but I encourage everyone to look it up. But when the memory finds that, you stay on that memory and you reprocess the memory so that it no longer affects you physically. When we found the memory of abandonment in me, I was like a newborn baby. I saw it like a slideshow going across my mind. And do you know that after that experience, it goes by like this? You feel like it's been 2 minutes, but it was actually 45.
Wow.
I could no longer bring those physical responses into my body at all. We had completely eliminated the physical responses in my body. So while the memory was still there, I saw the memory differently. But my body no longer carries the pain and the response of that memory.
So it's a version of the little flash thing from Men in Black.
Kinda. I don't know, but I'll tell you this much. After that, I felt like I was walking above the ground, floating on air kind of thing. It changes the way that your brain works completely, but you don't lose your memory, and it's not voodoo. It's science. So it's fantastic, and it's a fascinating method of therapy, and it is absolutely, in my opinion, curative when paired with neurofeedback as well.
That is so cool, Carmen. So you mentioned earlier that you do interviews. You obviously have a wonderful speaking voice, and you're articulate. I love talking to other podcasters because never worry about them being able to talk. Sometimes I'll get a medical doctor. I'm like, no. Talk, dude. You know.
But I need a conversation here.
It was so funny. One time I had a lady on, and I always with medical doctors say, so tell me why you got in the medical profession. Usually they tell this long, nice little story, want to help people, blah, blah, blah. She said, oh, I just always wanted to be a doctor. And she shut her mouth. And I'm like, oh, crap. I got to come up with something to say next.
But why?
But she took that away from me. Anyway. Podcaster stories, you guys. We have to put them out there every once in a while. So
yes.
you are a podcaster, talk about your show, what kind of people you interview. I assume a lot. I know you interviewed me many years ago, but talk about that.
Okay, so the podcast itself was for the health coaching space, but what I've done and what we've started for Carmen Hunter Health, and you can find me on carmenhunterhealth.com. Yep, go to the events tab there. I am scheduling interviews, and what we're doing them webinar style, so that people can come into the room with us and actually have conversations with the experts that we bring in. And then I live stream into my Facebook personal page. There you go. There's the events. Yep. And so you can register on that page. It leads directly out to registration, because what I love to do, even though I love the podcasting part, I kind of put it to the side because I wanted to have more of a conversation of bringing other people in to see what their needs were around some of these health topics. So I'm bringing forward thinkers, and you're going to have to be one of my people about cholesterol, because I have a lot of people out there that still don't agree about cholesterol. So we'll get you on the schedule for that. But, anyone that wants to have a conversation and hear in layman's terms about health and wellness and things that they can do to optimize their health today. I feel like sometimes in our space, especially, people are speaking over the general public's head. They're talking about, the hypothalamus pituitary axis, instead of just saying, well, there's this little messenger in your brain and it talks to, we need to get back onto level ground with our people out there, that they don't want to know everything about health and wellness. They just need to understand, again, where's trauma coming from, right? Where is this anxiety, depression, or inflammation in my body coming from in terms that I can understand, and what can I do about it in a way that I can understand? And I'm not an elimination diet fan, unless you're in an acute situation where you need one. But I can tell you, with people, when you throw things at them and say, you can no longer do this, you can no longer have this, but you need $6,000 worth of labs and you need to do this, you're not helping anyone. You're making them more stressed out. So my goal with this process is to bring more people in to where they can take a deep breath and go, now I understand that my immune system is 80 to 90% in my gut, and when I'm stressed, that's affected. Now I understand that my childhood trauma can show up in my body when I'm 40, 50, 60 years old, right? So that is the goal of what I'm trying to do. The biggest side of my business right now is to promote that free education for people. We don't pitch anything. We just get on and we talk, and we help people to understand where they are in their health today and help them to get to where they want to be in a way that doesn't feel worse to them.
Carmen, that's fantastic. And guys, again, go to carmenhunterhealth.com. That's CARMEN, Hunter, just like the hunter, and health.com. There was a Christian singer in the 90s called Carmen, CARMAN. So I always have to spell it out for people.
Yep.
But Carmen, thank you so much for being here today. Super exciting to talk to you about this topic, and I definitely wish you well as you continue your work. And thanks for being on my show.
Thanks for having me, and I'll get with you about being on my webinar. We'll be able to just continue this conversation. Be great.